So, welcome to this concluding session of our study of Jigme Lingpa's Treasury of Precious Qualities, where we've been also relying on the commentary by Kyabje Kangyur Rinpoche, Longchen Yeshe Dorje. And we've been studying this since actually I just had a look. We've actually this study started in November, late November 2021. So while this it's not been exactly every week, I think we've had something like 76 different sessions um, of this study. So I thought to just sort of go over it, or rather sort of have a conclusion that sort of comes with a summary of what we've looked at and a little bit of celebration really of this incredible work. So I'm glad you're here, and I'll try to sort of put it a little bit in context with Jigme Lingpa in general, and then just very briefly go over some of the aspects of the teaching, essentially the themes of the teaching. So we'll begin with just invoking Jigme Lingpa, the source of love and compassion for all beings, who knows all that is knowable. You are the emanation of Longchenpa and heir to a treasury of mind tamas. Sky-like yogin of the vast expanse of luminosity, Jigme Lingpa, at your feet I pray. So I think for many of us, Jigme Lingpa doesn't require much of an introduction, but of course, it's only, I think, natural that in this particular context, I'll just very briefly sort of mention a few details about him. Jigme Lingpa has been very important over the last few centuries in terms of really instigating a profound appreciation for the heritage of Longchenpa and for the practice of the great perfection. And his teaching, the Longchen Nyingtik, actually refers, it's on one hand, it really refers to the nature of Dzogchen, which is this, you say, the vast expanse. And Nyingtik refers to the particularly profound instructions that we come across in the Dzogchen teaching known as the Upadesha series. And that's where within the Upadesha series, where we have, okay, in the Dzogchen, we talk about 3 series, which is what we call the mind series, the space series, the instruction series or Upadesha series. And they have different emphasis. The mind series, we say, emphasizes the clarity, the cognitive aspect. The space series emphasizes the aspect of this cognitive, or rather sort of undiluted nature, and its abiding natural emptiness quality. And the instruction series is said to really just go to the heart of the matter, the very sort of undiluted cognition itself, what we refer to as Rigpa. And within that, you have, within the instruction series, you then talk about the outer, inner, and most secret sections. And what we call Nyingtik is really what then is regarded as the innermost aspect of this instruction series. And it literally means the heart essence, means the heart blood of the, in this generally we would say the heart blood of the Dakinis. So it's something that's regarded as particularly precious. And also for that reason, there is in the living tradition, of course, nowadays in the appropriation of Buddhism in the modern world, and that also includes appropriation of Dzogchen. I think many people have this sort of slightly colonialist attitude that we'll just take what we want from these natives. And use it as we feel. And as such, you then have entire face groups that sort of talk about the Nyingtik and describe the methodologies and so on. But from the living tradition, which I think us who are present here, we probably are connected with and respect, then these teachings are really regarded as extremely precious and are approached with a lot of care and veneration, not just out of, you could say, blind faith in the tradition, but really from the point of view of simply really having the intended impact on the student, there has to be a particular preparation. And that's where the work that we are looking at here, the Treasury of Precious Qualities, is part of that, part of the, you could say, the preparation for approaching the Great Perfection teaching, and particularly then the Heart Essence or Nyingtik teachings. So Jigme Lingpa, he lived in the 18th century, 1730 to 1798, and his life, every year we have his anniversary. So in there there's recordings of these anniversaries, and in there over the years I've been sort of talking a little bit about Jigme Lingpa's life in general, and his activity, his teaching, and so on. But very briefly here in the present context, we just want to mention that in the course of one of his retreats, it said that he had 3 visions of Longchenpa. And in these, then, his body, speech, and mind fused with Longchenpa. And really, at this point, you could say all cognitive obscurations fell away. And he was awakened in the primordial ground, as we say in the Dzogchen tradition. No longer any impediment in terms of his cognitive capacity, and all the qualities of enlightenment, strength, and compassion and wisdom flourished. And this is also why then we will sometimes refer to Jigme Lingpa as the Omniscient Jigme Lingpa. Now, when we talk about the teachings then of Longchenpa, Longchenpa arranged the Nyingtik or the Heart Essence teachings according to 2 particular lineages, that of Padmasambhava and that of Vimalamitra. And so we have in the tradition of Longchenpa, we have what is known as the 4 sections of the Heart Essence, which then comprise essentially the teachings from Vimalamitra and from Padmasambhava, and these are referred to as the mother heart essences. And then we also have the child heart essences, which are then 2 sets of explanations from Longchenpa himself. And so these 2 lineages with both a mother and a child teachings, these are referred to as the four sections of the heart essence. And down through history, really, these, what we call the Nyingtik Yashi, or the 4 sections of the heart essence, has really been the preeminent Dzogchen teachings. And we have countless stories of individuals who attained the rainbow body or attained great accomplishment on the basis of these teachings. Now, Jigme Lingpa then, on the basis of having this vision of Longchenpa and fusing his mind with Longchenpa, this of course came also very much on the basis of his deep and profound respect for Longchenpa's writings. So even though there is something like 400 years between the 2, we say it's particularly auspicious that Jigme Lingpa was born on the day that Longchenpa passed away, or in the 18th of the 12th lunar month. But really, Jigme Lingpa's work really became the essence of these Nyingtik teachings. And he had this treasure teaching known that we then call the Longchen Nyingtik, which really gathers all the teachings that we have from Longchenpa. And these are gathered in some what we call the root volumes of the heart essence, the Nyingtik Tsabe. And the writings of Jigme Lingpa, we have something like 9 volumes, but particularly within these 9 volumes, then there's a couple of volumes which are then known as these root volumes of the heart essence. And they have been expanded upon. For example, Dilgo Kangyur Rinpoche, he wrote some empowerment sections, and other and also other masters have written texts that are part of these root volumes of the heart essence. But essentially what we have there is really the pith of the Dzogchen teachings. And also it's in here that we find writings such as the what's called the Yeshe Lama, and also instructions in various sadhana practices and yoga practices and so on. So these are regarded as exceptionally profound. And we then presently are studying this root text, the Treasury of Precious Qualities, along with its commentary for Kangyur Rinpoche. And this is really a text that enables us to engage with this path. It provides really the not just theoretical, but also on a very deep, practical, transformative level, really the experience that lies at the basis of the practice of Dzogchen. Dzogchen, if we just take it again as a commodity, it could just become like, oh yeah, it's sort of like a nice little thing to think about, rest mind and its natural condition and so on. It becomes not much more than just sort of essentially some practice of shamatha. But once there is the perspectives that come from a deep appreciation for the reflections and the meditations that are taught in the Treasury of Precious Qualities, then it attains a completely different impact in terms of transforming the condition of a sentient being into a Buddha. So we have the root text itself. It's called the Rain of Joy, and it then actually takes you through these foundational reflections right up to the great perfection. Now, the Treasury of Precious Qualities has two sections. One goes through the sutra teachings, and that is what we've studied over the last few years. And essentially, it relates to also the preliminary practices, the Vajrayana preliminaries, which again are the sort of indispensable foundations really for engaging in the practice of the great perfection. But there is also then the teachings on the mantra vehicle, which are then the teachings that particularly guide us in the practice of what we call the main practice of the great perfection, that begins with the practice of sadhana and yoga, and then particularly then what we call the ground path and fruit of the great perfection. Now, the mantra section, in general, I think it's safe to say that this should be taught by somebody who's profoundly learned and accomplished. But at the same time, this has been translated by the Padmakara Translation Committee very capably, along with the commentary by Kangyur Rinpoche. So, of course, if we are practitioners on the path and so on, we should have a look at that. It's there, it's published. But at the same time, personally, I would like to wait until there is a great Kempo or great, say, holder of the lineage who will then go through this. And presently, what we've studied then corresponds to where most of us are at in terms of the practicing the preliminaries, as well as also really having the foundation for the practice of the main path, the main part. So about this this work, the Treasury of Precious Qualities, Paltram Rinpoche, he writes, he says, the author of this treatise is the great perfection adept, Rangjung Dorje, the Vijayadhara Jigme Lingpa. He had an excellent grasp of and great devotion for the teaching of the bliss-gone one, meaning the Buddha. Although he did not strive to develop the intellectual knowledge born of study and contemplation, still, through the force of directly seeing the nature of ultimate reality, the natural state of the great perfection, which is the wisdom that transcends the nature of things, he gained the wisdom born of meditation that comprehends all things in their multiplicity, and thus came to master the insight that precisely discerns phenomena. In addition, he wore the armor of working for the benefit of himself and others with great compassion during post-meditation. So it's well known that Jigme Lingpa was not particularly studious, but we would also say due to his previous lives, including his life as Garab Dorje's principal student, Jambal Shinyan, as his life as Vimalamitra, and so forth, as great beings in the past, King Tristan Detsen, then naturally throughout his early years, he had continually visions and experiences. But on the basis of having, and as he himself humbly states, having glanced at Longchenpa's writings, then he had this profound devotion for Longchenpa that brought about this experience that Paltram Rinpoche here refers to as then the force of directly seeing the nature of ultimate reality. He had the experience of the primordial ground. So that enabled him to teach unobstructedly. And something I'd like to go over is also here in this session, just a few little sections from the writings, and that just really reflect how beautiful his writings were. So even though he wasn't a scholar, merely from his realization, he was able to write in incredibly beautiful poetry. And I think that the English translation very well reflects that. Of course, the English translators would insist that you can't do justice to the original. That's of course true, but at the same time, also they've done a marvelous job, really, in terms of translating it. So it's a joy to read also in English. So as far as the teaching itself goes, we would say that the Treasury of Precious Qualities, in a way, fulfills something that was seen as, you could say, seen as a supplement, really, to Longchenpa's commentary, Longchenpa's auto-commentary to his Finding Rest in the Nature of Mind, which I think many of us are familiar with. And I think presently we have the fortune that Lopun, what's his name, Sunam Jamso, I think, is teaching this actually at the same time as these sessions here. But incidentally, then I didn't know that and I don't think he knew that I was doing this. So there's a little bit of a clash, but nevertheless, what is a great value of actually Lopun Sunam Jamso's teachings is actually he will probably be drawing on this commentary from Longchenpa called the Shinta Chenmo, or the Great Chariot. And we say that the Treasury of Precious Qualities is, you could say, a supplement to this commentary. So it's very related to Longchenpa's teachings, and of course, it is really something that enables us to particularly approach the teachings found in the Nyingtik Tsape, or the root volumes of the heart essence, but also, and this is really important, these commentaries that we have, such as the Treasury of Precious Qualities, or Words of My Perfect Teacher, or Torch Lighting the Path of Freedom, and these various Ngundro or preliminary practice commentaries, they really are universal, so we can apply them. They apply to no matter which preliminary practice we're doing within the Nyingmapa or within the Sakya, Kagyu, and Gelug. Now, this particular work then has a number of commentaries. So the root text itself, coming from Jigme Lingpa, is just a set of, I haven't actually counted them, but I would think maybe a couple of 100 stanzas. It's not that long, but at the same time, it really covers everything and is immensely profound. And as such, then there are commentaries that unpack the meaning of it. And Jigme Lingpa himself wrote 2 large volumes that are commentaries to this. And we also have commentaries by his main student, the first Drupchen, Jigme Trungpa Wöser. We also have commentaries by a great Khenpo who was a student of both Paltram Rinpoche and Jamgon Mipam Rinpoche, called Khenpo Yönten Gyatso, sometimes called Khenpo, among friends, Khenpo Yönga. And then we have a great Gelug Geshe, who was a Tugu from Mongolia, called Ngawan Tenda. We refer to this as him usually as as Sokpo Tenda, the Mongolian Tenda. We have his commentary. And then also Tugu Tsultum Sangpo wrote a commentary, and finally Kangyur Rinpoche here in the 20th century wrote a commentary. And then also, if we go on Lotsawa House, there's two short outlines from Paltru Rinpoche that just touches on some of the aspects of the Treasury of Precious Qualities. And I've actually included some of that in the following. Now, with regards to the study that we're receiving here, then the lineage really of the transmission of the Treasury of Precious Qualities comes down from Jigme Lingpa to the first Dorubjen, Jigme Trinley, to Jigme Trinley's student, Jigme Jeren Yugo, who was also a student of, Jigme Jeren Yugo was also a student of Jigme Lingpa. And he then passed this on to Jamin Khyentse Wangpo, who passed this on to Chidrung Chinli Jamba Jongne, who was a great master from the Ryuchen monastery in eastern Tibet. And he was the teacher of Dujum, the late His Holiness Dujum Rinpoche, Jigdral Yeshe Dorje, and also Kangyur Rinpoche. So Kangyur Rinpoche received this from Chidrung, who received it from Jamin Khyentse Wangpo. And then Dilgu Khyentse Rinpoche then wrote commentary then on this work. So rather we have Dilgu Khyentse Rinpoche, actually we would say he wrote the opening praises and also the conclusion of Kangyur Rinpoche's commentary. So you could say Dilgu Khyentse Rinpoche was involved with this. And also then Kangyur Rinpoche's commentary is included in the collected works of Dilgu Khyentse Rinpoche. So that's also where then the translators, the English translators, they have based their translation on this text that's found in Dilgu Khyentse Rinpoche's work. So, like I said earlier, what we've done over these last few years is then studying Volume 1, the Sutra section, and this is what essentially expounds what we refer to as the causal vehicle of characteristics. Now, this term characteristics, tsenyi tekpa, in a way, saying it's a tsenyi tekpa or vehicle of characteristics is a little bit sort of a literal translation, and it's slightly, if you ask me, Buddhoid and mystical, because what do we mean with that? Well, it actually means that we operate with the logic of the conventional mind, characteristics in terms of understanding cause and effect. The approach of the mantra vehicle actually goes beyond that. But essentially what we mean with this causal vehicle of characteristic is something that we can relate to in terms of our reasoning, in terms of our logic. So that's where the causal vehicle of characteristics, which is then the general sutra teachings we have from the Mahayana, they very much appeal to our you could say the valid cognition that arises from observing phenomena and also on the basis of reasoning. So that's what we mean with this causal vehicle of characteristics. So that's where we've then looked at these and essentially 9 chapters in that. Now the text itself is for practitioners. It's of course you could say we can go at practice in so many different ways. Sometimes we just would like to join sort of the singing and the sort of the aspect of the church-going aspect of just joining into pujas and so on, which is very nice. And sometimes we just like to be around the teachers. Sometimes we want to just study philosophy and we can become academics and we can become very learned and so on. But what's really intended with a text like this is really to galvanize our mind so that it's directed towards the actual path of enlightenment, eliminating the obscurations of our mind and unveiling complete, perfect enlightenment. That's the intention behind this. And in some way, when we come to a text like the Treasury of Precious Qualities, it actually already presumes that there is either a complete confidence in the teaching or else a solid foundation of theory, understanding the teachings, the philosophical teachings, and also experience, that we actually have some experience in meditation and know what it is that needs to be eliminated, what it is that needs to be realized. And so we have some idea of where this is going in terms of our personal experience. So the translators, they write in their introduction, they write, in covering the general sweep of sutra teachings, this commentary naturally contains a wealth of technical vocabulary, covering not only the metaphysical, psychological, and epistemological categories of the Abhidharma, but also of the Prajnaparamita Sutras and the philosophical teachings of the four Buddhist tenet systems, particularly that of Madhyamaka. So that's where, at this point, we're more approaching this in terms of being practitioners, and that's where it does presume that there already is some familiarity with the Buddhist teaching. This is in some way not a teaching that you'd want to give to somebody who's saying, oh yeah, the Buddhist teaching, tell me a bit about it, or what should I read? Then this text here is not really suited for that. It does require already some foundation in terms of understanding the, like it says here, the metaphysical, psychological, and epistemological teachings that we have in the teachings such as the Abhidharma, the Prajnaparamita, and so on. So what I'll be doing now is really just going over these content of this work, and not not doing it extensively, but just sort of picking a few, just picking one or two verses from each chapter, mainly just one verse from each chapter, which I found, verses that I found particularly beautiful. And also I'm going to be putting in Paltar Rinpoche's summary of what these chapters really are about. So we're just going to go over essentially the 9 chapters of the Treasury of Precious Qualities now, with a few select stanzas, and also then at the end look at the outline that we have in the commentary. So essentially sort of a little bit of a serious summary of what this text contains. Now the Treasury of Precious Qualities, the Reign of Joy, which is what the root text is called, starts off with what I've always thought of as a really beautiful and it sort of homage to the Buddha. And it just reflects Jigme Lingpa's incredible poetry. So I'm just going to read the text itself and then a little bit of a commentary from Kangyur Rinpoche that sort of unpacks really this beautiful opening. And it then says, a letter that proclaimed the 3 most precious ones, brought Princess Vine of Pearls to perfect joy. The lily faces of the demon's daughters withered, and she progressed, for such is Buddha's power. So Kangyur Rinpoche, he unpacks this and he says, Jigme Lingpa gives an elegant illustration of this by referring to the story of how the Buddha, and what he's referring to here is really the quality of the 3 jewels, or the quality of the Buddha, which is then, you could say, the object of homage as the text begins. So this is then refers to the story of how the Buddha once sent a message to the Princess Vine of Pearls, and I think this was a Sri Lankan princess. He sent a message to Princess Vine of Pearls in the form of a picture of himself, together with some verses printed on a piece of white cloth. When the girl saw the image, the joy she experienced was so intense that it was like a samadhi devoid of even the subtlest kind of discursive thought. And as she reflected on the meaning of the message, the 112 obscurations that are hindrances to liberation, and which are discarded on the path of seeing, fell away. The root text compares these obscurations to the deceitful faces of Mara's daughters, which are like the lilies of the night, opening in darkness and blasted by the sun of wisdom cultivated on the path of seeing. As a result, Vine of Pearls was prepared for the dissipation of what is to be eliminated on the path of meditation. And all this came about through the power of the Buddha's compassion. So it's really speaking about the blessing of the Buddha that enabled this princess really to traverse or connect with the path of that leads to awakening through the what we refer to as the five paths, the paths of accumulation, joining, seeing, and meditation that then leads to the path of no more learning. So that's the prologue. And then chapter 1. Now, this is again where we're going, this is beyond philosophy. This is where we are actually, as practitioners, we're beginning to completely shift our priorities. And we call this the thoughts that change the mind, change the way that we prioritize. And that is then appreciating the extraordinary condition of having been born as a human, which is so exceedingly rare. So Jigme Lingpa then here writes, so long enchanted in samsara's wilderness, tormented by the cutting of their heads and limbs, with seeds of future sorrow hidden in their minds, beings long so foolishly for bliss of higher realms. So this is a little bit like Kangyur Rinpoche says, we long for bliss, and yet we discard the cause of bliss. So Kangyur Rinpoche comments, he says, this first chapter explains the reason why the freedoms and advantages are difficult to obtain, and this functions as a cause for entering the Dharma. And this means that, well, I shan't pretend to know exactly what Kangyur Rinpoche says, and presumably this would go far beyond what I have to say. But just what I'm reading in this is something that is very often stated about this first reflection is that it's really coming on an incredibly positive note, which is we have won in the lottery. We have found something that is so exceedingly rare. And that's where, on the basis of how much suffering there is in the condition of confusion, samsara, then to presently have this opportunity is regarded as a raft in the midst of a situation where we're drowning. And so to really reflect on the immense value of this human existence functions then, as Kangyur Rinpoche says, as a cause for us seriously engaging in the practice of the path. The second chapter is a reflection on impermanence. And in here, in verse 6, it says here, and this is also something I've always, I remember at one point memorizing this, even though I can't remember it anymore, but it's a very beautiful image of simply just how quickly life passes by. It says here, a powerful bowman's shaft is swift indeed, but not as swift as pretas moving on the earth. The pretas in the air are swifter still, and swifter yet the gods of sun and moon, but swiftest of them all is human life. So there is this image in the classical in the classical Indian mythology about someone who not only could shoot an arrow incredibly fast, but far, but also was able to run and then catch the arrow before it landed. So that's fast. Now, the speed with which the pretas move, of course, is not sort of commonly known to us, but we can then presume that they move very fast. And then also even the pretas that move in the air and the sun and the moon also as we would know with the speed of the planets, move incredibly fast. But nothing is as fast or moves as fast, passes as fast as the human life. And of course, that's not obvious to us. But what Jigme Lingpa here wishes to tell us is really it goes very fast. Paltry Rinpoche says the second chapter explains that such freedoms and advantages are by nature impermanent. This serves as an encouragement to enter the Dharma swiftly and with diligence, rather than procrastinating and leaving it for another time. And that's where we might say, oh yeah, Dharma practice, yeah, I'll do that when I have time. I have to do other things, and that's where in many cultures, there's sort of the idea that, oh yeah, we'll practice, the spiritual path when we get old and we have the leisure. But the thing is, we might never get old. And even if we do, we might not be able to practice as well as when we have the faculties. So as much as we have these freedoms and advantages, they are not going to last. So this is very much something that is also sometimes referred to as the crop that kind of gets us moving. So that's where this impermanence, this reflection on impermanence is so important. The law of karma. So this is where there's two ways of understanding karma. And of course, karma is understanding cause and effect. And there's the cause and effects that you could say the way that we stumble through our confused existence is where then the actions that we perform, they lay down seeds. And on the basis of the conditions and so forth, they manifest in various ways. But as long as these causes and conditions take place within a dualistic framework, a delusional condition, then inevitably they're just creating sorrow, just creating suffering. Whereas there's also the causes and conditions of the path, and those conditions that can lead us to freedom. So that's where we should understand the reflection on karma is understanding that whatever we do has an impact. Whatever we do has an impact in terms of both samsara, but also in terms of the path of liberation. So Jigme Lingpa writes in verse 2, he says, the different virtues of a farmer's seeds are manifested in his crops, and different destinies are likewise made by many deeds, in grain and grown, accustomed to informal lives. So that's why we can observe. The law of karma is not something particularly mystical. It's simply the law of cause and effect that we can see, for example, in this. Which is drawn then from the image of a farmer's seed. And then later on in the chapter, then Jigme Lingpa says, while on the path, by means of concepts, merit is laid in, and wisdom free of all such concepts also is amassed. When these two are conjoined, the two veils are removed and the two kayas manifest. Such is the interworking of profound and pure causation. So that's where on the Mahayana path, we would say the two conditions that create awakening is the accumulation of merit and the accumulation of wisdom. So we would say when these work on us, they remove the veils, the cognitive and the emotional obscurations. And it's on the basis of that that we have the manifestation of the Dharmakaya and the Rupakaya, the Dharmakaya of awakening and the Rupakaya of compassionate activity for the benefit of beings. So that's also how karma works. As long as we still are within the realm of concepts, as long as we still operate within the experience of relative truth. So Paltry Rinpoche sums this up. He says the third chapter explains what to abandon and what to adopt concerning actions and their results. Given that in the condition to things being impermanent, our next life is determined exclusively by good and bad actions. So that's again also where we would say, if you want to know what you did in your past, look at your present situation. If you want to know what you will be like in the future, look at your present actions. And so the point really here is that our next life is determined exclusively by good and bad actions. And with this, we would mean, in terms of just the ordinary experience of a sentient being, good and bad actions would be the seeds that we sow. But if we're on the path, then we should appreciate how the actions of accumulating merit and the actions of accumulating wisdom then lead to liberation. So that's where, if we want to know where we will go next, we can look at what we're doing right now. The sufferings of samsara. So Jigme Lingpa writes, we should understand the truth of suffering. In all the 6 realms of samsara, high or low, no place is there, but is entrapped in misery, of pain, of change, of all-pervading suffering in the making. So, as long as there is a fundamental delusion, and as long as we appreciate how it's our mind that creates the realities that constitute the various, you could say, styles, what Trungpa Rinpoche calls styles of imprisonment, then we can understand how it is that there is only suffering as long as we are stuck in this confused condition. And that's where we then create these life worlds that we refer to as the 6 realms of samsara. We should understand that there's not a solid reality out there, but it's created by the mind. It's our mind that creates our reality. And so it creates various realities that is then described in the 6 realms. And that's where we should understand the primacy of mind. But we should also not just sort of in a modern context say, oh yeah, it's just psychological suffering. There's not any reality. Because that's where we might think, oh yeah, New York City, the Eiffel Tower, the Mount Fuji or whatever it might be, they're real. But psychology, oh, that's just in my head. And that's where, no, when we're talking about that it's the mind that creates our reality, we're saying, yes, New York City is created by the mind, just like the 6 realms of samsara are created by the mind. So yes, it's created by the mind, but New York City seems very real, doesn't it? So that's where also we should understand that the 6 realms of samsara, yes, they're created by mind, but they will be experienced as something very real, just like the way that our mind creates an experience of reality right now. So as long as there's this fundamental delusion taking place, then we're stuck in this situation of self-other and essentially a delusional experience that essentially operates on the basis of our fundamental confusion. And that's where there's 3 kinds of suffering. We talk about suffering of change, and then all-pervading suffering, meaning the kind of suffering that we experience that's just painful, and then the fact that things change. We can't hold on to anything. And then the all-pervading suffering, which is really that condition that exists as long as we're stuck in duality. So Paltrim just sums it up. He says, the 4th chapter teaches the suffering of samsara, since the result of positive and negative actions are the realm of the 6 classes, the 6 styles in which we imprison ourselves. Now, then there's an interesting one that's not commonly discussed, or rather, we could say in other teachings, we have all these that we've just discussed here, but the 4 wheels, they're taught various places, but I thought to actually include a bit of commentary here. So it's chapter 5 is about what we call the 4 wheels. And these are then to live in favorable, conducive places, to follow holy beings and imbibe their qualities, to have good aspiration and desire to be protected by one's merit. Such are the 4 great wheels, as Nagarjuna taught. Now, if we look at our teachers, if we look at the great sages, these 4 wheels, we can say, are perfectly present in their life examples. So, of course, nowadays, where Buddhism is new in our culture, it's not always we have these necessary conditions, and we're sometimes going to have to practice without them. But nevertheless, we can appreciate how these really constitute essential conditions, and they have very much been part of the lives that we look when we look at the great masters in the lineage, the conditions that they have established. Paltrimaj says, once the suffering of samsara is understood, the fifth chapter then explains the skillful means to eliminate that, namely the group of four great wheels that provide an entrance to the Dharma. So I've included a little bit of commentary. I'll get back to that later on. Commentary from Kangyur Rinpoche. So then the practice of taking refuge. Says that's chapter 6. It says, undeceiving refuge is itself the pledge to be the basis of the path that leads to freedom and the vessel for its qualities. Before embarking upon it, therefore, we must understand the qualities of both the teacher and his teaching. So we take refuge in the Buddha because we've understood there's somebody who got it right. They're worth listening to. There's a lot of confused opinions out there. There's a lot of paths. And of course, we should be discerning, and we don't just blindly walk in and just accept the Buddha. If we're born in a you could say a Buddhist culture, then there's a sense that yes, this works. But sometimes within the culture, if we are born in a Buddhist culture, it's just like this is what there is, people. Just that's what you get. But in the modern culture, where we actually have this sort of global situation, we actually could look what there are of different philosophical systems and different options. And it's actually on the basis of comparing what there is that we could actually see where the Buddha stands out as being extraordinary in terms of the insight. That's, of course, where we need to approach this with critical thinking to really appreciate the greatness of the Buddha. But that's where once we then see that the Buddha, this is someone who got it right, then the Buddha is worth following. And so that's where we take refuge then in the Buddha, as you could say, a place of safety from our confusion, hence the word refuge. Paltrimaj says, for someone who possesses these four great wheels in their entirety, the sixth chapter teaches taking refuge, since this is the foundation and support for entering the teachings. So then, chapter 7, the four boundless attitudes. These are then famously the four attitudes that are directed towards all sentient beings, and so we refer to them as boundless. It's a little bit different from in some traditions we talk about the four Brahma Viharas. They're similar, but they're not aimed at the infinity of sentient beings, and therefore they're not referred to as the four boundless. But they are then loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. And the qualities of these here then in stanza 12 are described in terms of where it says, by meditating in this way, we will, as ripened fruit, gain high rebirth among desire realm gods or humankind, and then enlightenment itself. According to effects resembling their causes, we will actively continue in their practice and experience happiness untroubled by adversity. So once this attitude of loving kindness, compassion, and so forth grows in our being, then it becomes something that spills into awakening also in the way that we will continue to benefit beings. So we speak about it as something that both provides future happiness and also ultimate enlightenment. And so Paltrimaj here he says, the seventh chapter then teaches the four immeasurables, which after taking refuge marks the initial entry point into the great vehicle. So we talk about refuge as being the entry point into the Buddhist teaching or the Buddhist path, and then the bodhicitta and the four immeasurables as being the initial gateway into the Mahayana. And then there's the vow of bodhicitta. So here in stanza 2, it says, when beings engender bodhicitta in their minds, though still imprisoned in samsara, bound by sin and pain, they gain a crown, the name of children of the conqueror, and are revered by all the world, both gods and humankind. So we might not be bodhisattvas, we might not be advanced on the path, but having that determination that we wish to serve sentient beings, we become honorable persons. And as such, then, are object of respect. Paul Rinpoche says, the 8th chapter teaches the actual generation of the mind set upon awakening. And that's what we mean with bodhicitta. Since training the mind in the 4 immeasurables automatically causes bodhicitta to arise and makes the mind pliable. So once we generate this greatness of mind, caring for others, then also the rigidity of the self-centered, egocentric mind dissolves. It makes our mind pliable. We begin to melt the rigid ice of our fixation on a self. And then in terms of the training, and this then constitutes the last chapter, actually, of the first volume of Treasury of Precious Qualities. Here Jigme Lingpa writes, within the fields of carefulness and introspection, the shoots of bodhicitta may be cultivated easily. I beg that we uphold it steadily, removing faults, and strive by every means to strengthen it. So that is that we then engage in something that is immensely meaningful, but it's also important then that we make sure that it doesn't weaken, and it's something that we continually strengthen more and more. And that's where we also have this famous aspiration prayer that we often say, where we say, may bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. And so Paul Rinpoche then comments about this. He says, the 9th chapter then teaches the precepts of bodhicitta in aspiration and action, since it is necessary, once bodhicitta is aroused, to train correctly in its precepts, and thereby maintain it without fail. So this is just some short extracts from the text itself. And then I just wanted to finish off just giving a taste for sort of an overview of how Kangyur Rinpoche then sort of outlines this, and how Kangyur Rinpoche just structures the commentary. And he talks in terms of 3 sections, 3 parts. 1 is turning the mind to the Dharma, 2, an incentive for the practice, and 3, the gradual path of the 3 kinds of beings. And then these are then further subdivided. So the part 1, turning the mind to the Dharma, we do that. And like I said earlier, it's that positive incentive that comes from appreciating the value of human existence. That's what chapter 1 does. It turns the mind to the Dharma, appreciating the value of human existence. And then once we appreciate then realizing it doesn't last, an incentive, part 2 is an incentive for the practice. And that's chapter 2, the reflection on impermanence. Part 3, then, the gradual path of the 3 kinds of beings. That where we would say there are beings that long for simply just being happy in their future lives. Then there are beings who would long to be out of samsara. And finally, there's beings who not only want to be out of samsara, but actually care about the fact that sentient beings everywhere are suffering. So we talk about these 3 kinds of beings. So chapter 3 is for the beings of lesser scope. It's simply just the teachings on the law of karma, understanding what leads to what, and then being proactive in creating the conditions for higher realms. Good karma, if you like. Then the path of median scope is those that reflect on the suffering of samsara and then intend to liberate themselves from it, not just being reborn in higher realms, but actually understanding that even in the higher realms, then there is still suffering. And then you have then the rest of the work is about the extraordinary path of beings of the greater scope, which begins with the four wheels, the circumstances then that are very helpful for our practice, and then taking refuge, the four boundless, vowing to serve sentient beings on the basis of the vow, bodhicitta, and the bodhisattva precepts. So I just wanted to go over this four wheels, which, like I say, is not taught everywhere. And it also, again, if we look at the lives of the great teachers in the past, we can see this is very much something that they abided by. And of course, in the modern context, it's not that easy, but we can nevertheless appreciate really the reason why, when we look at the beings the cultures in which Buddhism flourished and those who practiced within these cultures, the lifestyle that they adopted. So this is then from Kangyur Rinpoche. His commentary says, people who embark upon the path of the Mahayana, the supreme path of beings of great scope leading to omniscience, should try to acquire four circumstances. They should, 1, live in solitude in a place that has all the necessary conditions and is in harmony with the Dharma. They should, 2, frequent a teacher who is learned in the Tripitaka and steeped in the practice of the 3 trainings. So the Tripitaka are the teachings from the Buddha. We call the Buddha Vachana, the words of the Buddha that really constitute what we call the teachings on the Vinaya lifestyle, particularly monastic lifestyle, the teachings on the practices, the sutra teachings, the teachings that the Buddha gave in terms of practicing the path, and particularly the Abhidharma, which gives an understanding of the basis for why we practice. You could say the theory and the philosophy behind it. So that's called the Abhidharma. So these 3 baskets, the teachings on Sutra, the teachings on Vinaya, and the teachings on Abhidharma, these 3 baskets are then called the Tripitaka. Tripitaka means 3 baskets. And then on the basis of that, then having that, you could say, theory, then the path itself consists of the 3 trainings, which is the trainings based on discipline, meditation, and wisdom. And Kangyur Rinpoche then says, by doing this, they will avoid the inferior attitudes of ordinary folk, as well as the wrong behavior that leads to suffering, and they will acquire all the good qualities deriving from the Dharma of transmission and realization. And then they should, in addition, 3, nourish an intense wish to practice in accordance with the teaching expounded by their master. So that's where then following what the master has taught, and should zealously adopt the supreme protection afforded by the merit accumulated in their past and present existences. So that's where, again, understanding what are the causes and conditions necessary. Kangyur Rinpoche then quotes Nagarjuna, who says, then the Venerable Nagarjuna refers to these 4 conditions as the 4 wheels, the idea being that just as someone riding in a horse-drawn chariot can cover in a short time a distance that would take many days for a cow or ox, a bodhisattva taking advantage of these 4 conditions will progress speedily toward omniscience. So that's where we talk about then a vehicle of conveyance, which in the old India really constituted then a horse-drawn cart, a chariot that could move quite quickly, compared to other more slower moving vehicles. Nagarjuna refers to them in his Shrulika, his letter to a friend, when he says, your dwelling place befits the task. You keep the company of holy being. With highest aspiration and a store of merit, you have indeed the 4 wheels all complete. So again, this is something that in our culture is not so developed as of yet, and we will probably have to, in many cases, not necessarily have all the right conditions there. But at the same time, we can also then appreciate really why the cultures from where presently Buddhism is being, you could say, imported into our culture, why their particular lifestyle and the institutions of practice really unfolded the way that they did. Now, I just wanted to just mention very briefly that the translators, the Padmakara Translation Committee, which I think in this case was Wilson Fletcher and Helena Blankletter, they included also some really helpful appendixes. And the first is an appendix that really talks about the cosmology that you find in Buddhism. Impermanence demonstrated by the formation and destruction of the universe according to Buddhist cosmology. And I think in many cases they have taken this from one of the commentaries on the Yönten, which is that by Khenpo Yönten Gyatso. But we have then an appendix that actually describes this cosmology that we very often come across in Buddhism. And then also there's discussion of what we mean with the Bardo, something that comes up a lot. The Four Truths, the Four Noble Truths, the five aggregates, the qualities of realization, the five paths and the 37 elements leading to enlightenment, which also are, you could say, things that we're continually referring to in the teachings. The two truths, which is really essential for us understanding what we're doing on the path and how to understand our reality and also what we call ultimate reality. The Madhyamika school, and that is the view that really underpins the insight into reality. And then also here a discussion on the 21 qualities of the Dharmakaya wisdom, and finally the 3 doors of perfect liberation. So that's just to mention that there are these resources available for us. So that's that. And I just want to express my joy that we could study this work, the Treasury of Precious Qualities. Here you have it in its publication, and particularly then what we've studied is then this volume here. And again, for those who are interested in the Great Perfection teaching, particularly as it comes down from Longchenpa and Jigme Lingpa, what is sometimes referred to as the victorious father and son, then this is really sort of an indispensable companion. So I'm very happy that we could do this. Now, I'm also doing this time because even though we finished last time with the text itself, I had actually mentioned that those teachings would go on, or our study would go on here in December. But this won't be possible. And also then I thought good to have a little bit of a conclusion that rounds off and summarizes what we've done. So at this point, there won't be any more study for a while. After Losar, I'd like to continue then with a text which is written by Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche's root teacher. It's called the Chariot to Freedom. And again, it's been translated by Padmakara, mainly Steve Gethin. And I think it would be really good to, just like we've studied this text here, to go through this text. This is also one that touches on the preliminary part, the preliminary practices. So as we probably all of us know, the preliminary practice is not something that we just sort of have to get through, but it really is also the main practice. And you can look at the lives of all the great teachers of the Great Perfection. This is something that is everybody continually practices. So that'll begin after Losar. Losar, I think, is the 28th of February, if I'm not wrong. And then it'll be not the Saturday after that, but the following Saturday, March 8th. Just a word about this text. where in the forward, Tukupen Wangel actually talks about something, how Dilbu Khyentse Rinpoche felt about this text. And he says, Tukupen Wangel writes, with the Cultural Revolution, this book became exceedingly rare, and then, like many other texts, was thought to have been lost. Nobody knew that one copy had in fact been preserved in a cave. This copy was finally brought to Dilbu Khyentse Rinpoche, who became so happy. Just having this book brought into his presence moved him so much that tears of joy came to his eyes. From then on, until further copies of the book were printed, he would always keep it close to him. He cherished it so much. He used to say that if one has the fortune to study this book, it is really like studying the Buddha's teachings in their entirety. So this is a wonderful text. Then it was written at the request of Adzung Drukpa Rinpoche, who is a close student of Jamyen Khyentse Wangpo. And Shiching Gyaltsab was renowned as a very great bodhisattva, and particularly we honor him as the root teacher of Dilbu Khyentse Rinpoche, the first root teacher, together also with Tsongsa Khyentse Chökyi Lodrö. So this is a real gem of teachings, and us who are on the path, I think, considering how much information comes our way from all sides, media and the worries that we have in the modern world, we can't soak our mind enough in the teachings of the Dharma, the teachings that motivate us and clarify the path that we're on. So I hope you can join us when we do this study. So at this point, then, if there's any questions, let's see here. Okay, all right. So thank you for your thank yous, or rather, we're sharing this sort of a conclusion. So good, yeah. One writes, thank you for this thoughtful conclusion and for providing an opportunity for us to connect with the wonderful work of Jigme Lingpa. And so true. Many thanks, Grand Possum. Thank you, P1, for connecting us to this wondrous, blessed we are. Thank you, Lopenla, and thank you, wonderful summary, and so forth. So like I said, thank you for your thank yous. I'll just chant a few, we'll lead us in a few chants of just some brief chant of dedication and aspiration at this point. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. May the Buddha appear in this world, may the light of the teaching shine like the sun, may the holders of the teaching live in harmony, and thus may all be auspicious for the teaching to endure. We pray for the good health of the teachers. We pray for their precious lives to be long. We pray for their activities to spread and increase. May we be blessed never to part from the teachers. Om Swasti, Skull Garland Lotus Heruka, conqueror of Maras, whose deathless natural wisdom mind has transformed the root of existence into great Vajra bliss. Subjugator of apparent phenomena, please shower the blessings of immortality. Fearless Lord of speech, you are the Vajra holder of the profound secret treasures of wisdom and compassion. Victorious one of all-pervading activity, may your three secrets remain indestructible and everlasting. As vowed by Vimala Mitra and King Trisomdetsen to constantly manifest outer compassion, you came as a warrior to protect the doctrine and all beings in this dark age. May you remain forever as the unchanging Vajra essence. May the virtuous seed of this supplication, warmed and moistened by the undeceiving two truths, ripen into a splendid fruit that beautifies the three worlds with utmost auspiciousness. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jakob.